Hello, friends, and welcome back to another episode of the Liberty Weekly podcast. I'm your host, as always, Patrick McFarland. This one is episode number 221, and the show notes may be found at libertyweekly.net/221. And in this episode, I'm going to be reviewing the article that I published today, which this is being recorded on Wednesday, June 22nd, 2022. So maybe 4 or 5 days before this episode is going to be released. But today, my article, Brzezinski's Proxy War Playbook, was released, published on the Libertarian Institute at libertarianinstitute.org. And in case you forgot, this show and podcast is featured on the Libertarian Institute at libertarianinstitute.org/Patrick, alongside all my friends, Keith Knight at Don't Tread on Anyone, Kyle Ancelone with Conflicts of Interest, and Tommy Salmons with Year Zero. Joining Kyle Ancelone on Conflicts of Interest, of course, is Connor Freeman and Will Porter as the co-hosts there. And if you, of course, Scott Horton and Sheldon Richmond on the masthead there as well. And if you go to the news section, you will find excellent coverage of the latest news by Kyle Ancelone and Will Porter, primarily over there on the news. So don't forget to check Libertarian Institute every day and make it one of your daily habits. And here's the news section here. Very critical to follow all of Kyle's news roundups that he does for the Institute. Everything you need to know about what's going on in foreign policy. And I think he puts domestic stuff in there as well. So very important. And of course, brought to you as well by my my membership website, libertyweekly.club, which I'll talk a little bit about later. But to dive right into the article that was published today, Brzezinski's Proxy War Playbook. Now, I don't remember exactly what possessed me to write this article. I always wanted to one of the first things that I learned about foreign policy was the United States luring the Soviet Union into invading Afghanistan in the 1980s. And of course, in like 9/11 conspiracy circles, this is often brought up to say that the CIA trained Osama bin Laden by starting the Mujahideen in Afghanistan. And while I'm interested in that topic, I don't really have much to say about that today in this episode, but I wanted to, with this piece, kind of compare the similarities between Brzezinski's plan for Afghanistan, because Zbigniew Brzezinski is a very, very influential figure in the foreign policy establishment. And actually, I just remembered why I kind of got into this topic and on Zbigniew Brzezinski in the first place, because I was recording a bonus episode for members at my membership website, which you can become a member too if you go to libertyweekly.club and hit the subscribe button. But I was doing a bonus episode of the podcast and discussing a piece that I'm working on, returning to the Xinjiang Uyghur genocide topic. Still working on that piece, but I did talk about Zbigniew Brzezinski and came across the fact that he was the former director and co-founder of the Trilateral Commission. He is an architect of the Soviet-Afghan War, which I will talk about a little bit more. And he's also an elite insider. And I talked, in this bonus episode, I went and talked a little bit about James Corbett's episode, Meet Zbigniew Brzezinski, Conspiracy Theorist, talking about his influence. So that kind of turned me on and wanted to visit this idea of Zbigniew Brzezinski and his acolytes and his proteges trying to recreate the Soviet-Afghan invasion and transpose that into Ukraine and create a similar situation. Because going right into the article, in 1998, President Jimmy Carter's national security advisor, Zbigniew Brzezinski, told Le Nouvel Observateur, French magazine, that the CIA, quote, knowingly increased the probability that the Russians would invade Afghanistan by covertly supporting the Mujahideen before the Soviet invasion in 1980. Later in that same interview, or was it 79, December of 79, I believe. Later in that same interview, Brzezinski claims that this covert intervention caused the end of the Soviet Union. So if we go to the actual interview, and you can kind of see the transcript here. Question. The former director of the CIA, Robert Gates, stated in his memoirs that the American intelligence services began to aid the Mujahideen in Afghanistan 6 months before the Soviet invasion. And this period, typo on the website. In this period, you were the national security advisor to President Carter. You therefore played a key role in this affair. Is this correct? And so if you go to my article, I actually do link to where Gates states that in his memoirs, I believe. Let's see. So yeah, I actually did link to the page in Robert Gates's autobiography where he talks about this program and talks about the intervention. He says the meeting was finally held on July 3rd, 1979, and almost 6 months before the Soviets invaded Afghanistan. Jimmy Carter signed the first finding to help the Mujahideen covertly. It authorized support for insurgent propaganda and other psychological operations in Afghanistan, establishment of radio access to the Afghan population through third country facilities, and the provision either unilaterally or through third countries of support to the Afghan insurgents in the form of either cash or non-military supplies. The Afghan effort began relatively small. Initially, somewhat more than $500,000 was allocated, with almost all being drawn within 6 weeks. So that's where he's talking about the involvement there. And he says on Christmas Eve and Christmas Day 1979, the Soviets massively intervened in Afghanistan. A covert action that began 6 months earlier, funded at just over $500,000, would, within a year, grow to tens of millions and most assuredly included the provision of weapons. There's no doubt that the invasion of Afghanistan was a watershed not only for the Soviets, but also in resolving disagreements in the U.S. government about what the Soviets were up to and how the U.S. would deal with them. The administration imposed a wide range of sanctions on the Soviets, often without much consultation with the Allies, who were dragged along on many measures and simply balked on others, like boycotting the 1980 Olympic Games. As senior U.S. officials looked at Soviet behavior after the invasion, the key question was what it meant in terms of longer-range Soviet goals in the region. Turner addressed this issue in a sensitive, eyes-only memo he sent to the President and other members of the National Security Council on January 16th, 1980. The paper, Soviet Options in Southwest Asia After the Invasion of Afghanistan, made the following points. It is unlikely that the Soviet occupation is a pre-planned first step in the implementation of a highly articulated grand design for the rapid establishment of hegemonic control over all of Southwest Asia. The occupation may have been a reluctantly authorized response to what was perceived by the Kremlin as an imminent and otherwise irreversible deterioration of its already established position in a country within the Soviets' legitimate sphere of influence. However, they do covet a larger sphere of influence in Southwest Asia and probably believe that the occupation improves their access to lucrative targets of opportunity. So that's what Robert Gates has to say about it. And that's, if you'll excuse that aside, that's what Gates has to say about it. And that's what the interviewer is referring to in this interview of Brzezinski. Brzezinski responds after being questioned about Robert Gates's illuminations in his autobiography. He says, yes, according to the official version of history, CIA aid to the Mujahideen began during 1980, that is to say, after the Soviet army invaded Afghanistan on December 24th, 1979. But the reality, closely guarded until now, is completely otherwise. Indeed, it was July 3rd, 1979, that President Carter signed the first directive for secret aid to the opponents of the pro-Soviet regime in Kabul. And that very day, I wrote a note to the president in which I explained to him that, in my opinion, this aid was going to induce a Soviet military intervention. Despite this risk, you were an advocate of this covert action. But perhaps you yourself desired the Soviet entry into the war and looked for a way to provoke it. Brzezinski, it wasn't quite like that. We didn't push the Russians to intervene, but we knowingly increased the probability that they would. Question: when the Soviets justified their intervention by asserting that they intended to fight against secret U.S. involvement in Afghanistan, nobody believed them. However, there was an element of truth in this. You don't regret any of this today. Brzezinski says, regret what? That secret operation was an excellent idea. It had the effect of drawing the Russians into the Afghan trap, and you want me to regret it? The day that the Soviets officially crossed the border, I wrote to President Carter, essentially, we now have the opportunity of giving to the USSR its Vietnam War. Indeed, for almost 10 years, Moscow had to carry on a war that was unsustainable for the regime, a conflict that brought about the demoralization and finally the breakup of the Soviet Empire. And the interviewer questions him about, I suppose, creating future terrorists. And Brzezinski says, what is more important in the world today, the Taliban or the collapse of the Soviet Empire? Some agitated Muslims or the liberation of Central Europe and the end of the Cold War? Question: some agitated Muslims, but it has been said and repeated, Islamic fundamentalism represents a world menace today. Brzezinski says, nonsense. It is said that the West has a global policy in regard to Islam. That is stupid. There isn't a global Islam. Look at Islam in a rational manner, without demagoguery or emotionalism. It is the leading religion in the world with 1.5 billion followers. But what is there in common among fundamentalists? Saudi Arabia, moderate Morocco, militarist Pakistan, pro-Western Egypt, or secularist Central Asia. Nothing more than what unites the Christian countries. So, that is the infamous interview with the French newspaper. And again, this happens in 1998, where Brzezinski says that, fundamentalist Islamic terror is not a global menace. And then, of course, 3 years later, you have 9/11 happening. So very interesting little thing. It's been often cited. In fact, it's a pretty infamous interview that he did. And a lot of people put that forward to say that the United States is what caused the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan. And I don't quite make that claim. One of the reasons why is because in Fool's Errand, Scott's book, Fool's Errand, he talks about it a little bit, saying, foreign correspondent Eric Margulies, who covered the 1980s Afghan war extensively, is dubious that U.S. covert intervention is what made the difference in the Soviet decision to invade, pointing out that the Americans involved had an interest in inflating their own role in events. According to Margulies, the Soviets saw a crisis coming anyway. The USSR's favored warlords had gotten so diverted and out of control, torturing and murdering people and fomenting civil war, that the Kremlin feared the survival of the entire Kabul regime was at risk. Famed Soviet dissident Andrei Sakharov agrees with Margulies, writing that Afghan President Hafizullah Amin's independent and destructive policies made him unacceptable to Moscow. The KGB murdered him immediately after invading the country. Regardless, first the Carter and then the Reagan administrations, along with their Saudi and Pakistani allies, lent massive financial and material support to the Mujahideen resistance fighters. These included Afghans as well as the, quote, International Islamic Brigades, comprised of thousands of so-called Arab Afghans from across the Middle East who were sent by their governments to fight a holy war against the communist invasion of Muslim land. The U.S. eventually even provided advanced guided, shoulder-fired, surface-to-air Stinger missiles, which helped the Afghan resistance to level the fight against the attack helicopters of the technologically sophisticated Soviet Air Force. President Reagan met and had his picture taken with Mujahideen leaders in the White House's Oval Office. Hollywood even released this movie, Rambo 3, in 1988 to explain the supposedly covert but widely known operation to the American people. So, Fool's Errand, page 27 and 28, Scott talks about that. And so in here, of course, I explain that whole situation with Afghanistan as a pretense, or at least as an introduction to try to compare that situation to what we're seeing today in Ukraine and the lead up to it. So mainly what types of U.S. intervention happened and when, what the Soviet response was in terms of, there were military actions taken by the Russians in each case. Well, what did they say about that military intervention? and the reasons why they were conducting it was what I wanted to look at. So we get that from Brzezinski. Fast forward to July 2014, almost 6 months after the Maidan Revolution and Russia's subsequent annexation of Crimea, Brzezinski hints at a similar plan for Ukraine than Afghanistan. Although he couched it in defensive terms. So he's trying to say, well, we're not trying to create an insurgency in Ukraine. We're just giving them weapons to defend themselves with, as if there's trying to make this distinction between splitting very narrow hairs, a distinction between what an insurgency is, a defensive insurgency. I guess an insurgency, we should define terms. In my understand it, in the way that I use it, an insurgency is when an occupying force is engaged by non-regular military units that are, I guess they could be organized to a certain extent. And I don't know if the non-regular part is an essential definition. I suppose you could have regular soldiers fighting an insurgency, but I think that a very quintessential distinction of an insurgency is that it's hard to tell what you're fighting against when you're the occupying force, because some appear to be civilians and some aren't. So that's what I'm referring to. And I suppose Brzezinski is probably trying to couch it as, well, we are providing training and arms, or I would like to provide training and arms for a defensive force, a regular defensive force that would repel a Russian invasion. So in July 2014, Brzezinski writes on the Atlantic Council's blog, quote, "If Ukraine has to be supported so that it does resist, the Ukrainians have to know the West is prepared to help them resist, and there's no reason to be secretive about it. It would be much better to be open about it and to say to the Ukrainians and to those who may threaten Ukraine that if Ukrainians resist, they will have weapons, and will provide some of those weapons in advance of the very act of invasion." That's pretty important. Because in the absence of that, the temptation to invade and to preempt may become overwhelming. But what kind of weapons is important, and in my view, they should be weapons designed particularly to permit the Ukrainians to engage in effective urban warfare of resistance. So, again, this distinction is splitting hairs. So on the one hand, he says, well, defensive weapons, right? Kind of hinting that it would be a regular Ukrainian resistance. But then at the end, he's talking about effective urban warfare of resistance, which really connotes fighting an insurgency, something bogging the Russians down in urban warfare. And it's notable that the Russian invasion of Ukraine, to this point, at least, has been largely trying to avoid, again, in my understanding, trying to avoid getting bogged down in fighting in those metropolitan areas. Now, of course, there is some urban combat, but it does seem like the fighting and invasion is mostly contained to the eastern part of the country, of course, the Donbass region of Donetsk and Luhansk. So in September 2014, and I guess I want to show on screen the Atlantic Council article that Brzezinski wrote. July 2nd, 2014, Brzezinski, the West should arm Ukraine. So pretty straightforward here. In the stock footage was people with a shoulder-fired RPG. And so you could go through and read through the whole article there and see more context from what he's saying. Then in September 2014, a few months after the article where he writes in the Atlantic Council about arming Ukraine, he revisited the topic in an MSNBC interview. Brzezinski says, "For a moment, the NATO alliance, as well as Europe and America jointly, have not been giving military aid to Ukraine, but I would not exclude the possibility of some defensive weaponry being given to the Ukrainians before too long, simply if the Russians, and particularly Putin, continue to try to intimidate Ukraine. That's not the same thing as defending them, it's helping them defend themselves." MSNBC says, "Is that the middle path you think the United States is going to take? Something more than economic sanctions, but less than a proxy war?" And keep in mind, this is the interviewer's words. This is not Brzezinski's words. So maybe he's not trying to split the hairs. but they're couching it as in it's something more than economic sanctions, but less than a proxy war. And he says, well, I think so. It seems to me that if we really are serious about Ukraine having the right to be an independent state with a friendly relationship with Europe, but not necessarily a member of NATO, and if Ukraine is not only threatened, but actually victimized by Russia using force, then some defensive arms publicly given, but only defensive weaponry handed over to Ukrainians makes eminent sense. It contributes to greater stability, and it's more likely to deter Mr. Putin than if he's in effect given the green light to use as much force as he feels like. So, and I feel like this is where it really kind of backfires, because you have Brzezinski saying that, whoa, we're going to give these weapons to Ukraine in order to deter Russia from invading, when actually in reverse, like the reality is reverse, because by giving Ukraine weapons and training their forces, that actually is a casus belli that Putin cites in his speech, his invasion speech. And we'll talk about that more, but it's important just to lay out and highlight that as we're reading through Brzezinski's statements. So I say, despite his defensive framing in Ukraine, Washington's support for the Ukrainian military bears many similarities to its support of the Mujahideen. The first documented CIA support to the Mujahideen came in July 1979. We went through that already. But when a small political action program was approved to support the burgeoning Afghan insurgency through Pakistan. After the invasion, Washington's clandestine assistance to the Mujahideen sought to, quote, get arms in their hands and keep them fighting. These efforts consisted of sales of military equipment through the Pakistani ISI. And additionally, I think I read through a article. This was my source that I used. That the United States also rallied support through other countries to help the Ukrainian, or to help the Afghan resistance. And I think it was maybe the War on the Rocks article that talked about this. And again, War on the Rocks, my understanding, is a kind of a hawkish website written by national security insiders. So I just wanted to check this site and see. Yeah. So third, Carter approved the decision to, quote, concert with Islamic countries on a covert action campaign to help the rebels. Crucial to that campaign, along with Pakistan's role as executive agent and provider of sanctuary, was Saudi Arabia's agreement to match CIA funding dollar for dollar, secured when Brzezinski visited in February 1980. Egypt also provided support, as did China and the United Kingdom. But Saudi Arabia did much more to sponsor holy war against the Soviets in Afghanistan. And so I think it's very applicable, and I think it's a big deal that China was involved as well, because I've written before that China and Russia aren't guaranteed bedfellows, and how U.S. policy has done so much to push Russia and China together. Well, if you go back in time, you have China helping to fund a proxy war against the USSR, because I would assume because of the Sino-Soviet split that occurred, and the kind of the bad diplomatic relations between those countries during that time. But it's in parallel. I mean, that Afghan situation is parallel to the situation in Ukraine, where you have this gargantuan multi-country effort to arm Ukraine, while the same thing happened, and it was arranged and coordinated by the United States in the Afghan War, the Afghan-Soviet War. So in the Reagan years, these transfers were facilitated by the deployment. These efforts consisted of sales of military equipment through the Pakistani ISI. The most effective support included the transfer of Stinger missiles, which equipped the Mujahideen to destroy Russian helicopters. In the Reagan years, these transfers were facilitated by the deployment of CIA Special Activities Division paramilitary officers. So you have actual CIA officers on the ground that are training and facilitating the transfer of weapons to the Mujahideen. And it's important that training would consist of, you can't just take Stinger missiles and put them in the hands of Afghans, for instance, or even in the hands of Ukrainian soldiers and expect them to know how to to effectively use and deploy and implement the weapons. You actually need to train them. And going up to the picture that I used here, here's a picture of, I don't know if it was US or Russian soldiers that were assisting to train the Ukrainians on the use of US weapons. So, let's see. So in early February 1980, Brzezinski visited Pakistan for a series of meetings with then Pakistani President Mohammad Zia-ul-Haq to discuss H-A-Q, to discuss American support to Pakistan in the wake of the Soviet invasion. As a part of the delegation, Brzezinski made a, quote, symbolic visit to Afghan refugees in the Khyber Pass. Speaking of the Mujahideen, he told the refugees, "We know of their deep belief in God, and we are confident that their struggle will succeed. That land over there is yours. You'll go back to it one day because your fight will prevail, and you'll have your homes and your mosques back again because your cause is right and God is on your side." So this is a pretty infamous footage that was part of a BBC documentary. So I'll just play that.
U.S. National Security Advisor Brzezinski flew to Pakistan to set about rallying resistance. He wanted to arm the Mujahideen without revealing America's role. On the Afghan border near the Khyber Pass, he urged the soldiers of God to redouble their efforts.
We know of their deep belief in God, and we are confident that their struggle will succeed. That land over there is yours. You'll go back to it one day because your fight will prevail and you'll have your homes and your mosques back again because your cause is right and God is on your side.
The purpose of coordinating with the Pakistanis will be to make the Soviets bleed for as much and as long
as possible, is what he finishes up saying. So, so in January, so fast forward to Ukraine, knowing all that, in January 2022, a month before the Russian invasion of Ukraine, it was revealed by U.S. intelligence officials that the CIA had been providing covert assistance to the Ukrainian military since at least 2014. The program began under Barack Obama, was expanded under Donald Trump, and continued under Joe Biden. According to Yahoo News, citing the article here, the multi-week U.S.-based CIA program has included training in firearms, camouflage techniques, land navigation, tactics like cover and move, intelligence, and other areas, according to officials. The program has involved, quote, very specific training on skills that would enhance the Ukrainians' ability to push back against the Russians, said the former senior intelligence official. The training, which has included tactical stuff, in quotes, is going to start looking pretty offensive if Russians invade Ukraine, said the former official. One person familiar with the program put it more bluntly. Quote, the United States is training an insurgency, said a former CIA official, adding that the program has taught the Ukrainians how, quote, to kill Russians. So you get a link to that article here. And then I believe that Will Porter and Kyle Anzalone did an article on it as well. So it's quite a substantial article. Beginning, the CIA is overseeing a secretive intensive training program in the U.S. for elite Ukrainian special operations forces and other intelligence personnel, according to 5 former intelligence and national security officials familiar with the initiative. The program, which started in 2015, is based at an undisclosed facility in the southern U.S., according to some of those officials. So, to be clear, this program is going on in the United States. But it also says, going back decades, the CIA has provided limited training to Ukrainian intelligence units to try to shore up an independent Kiev and prevent Russian subversion. But cooperation, quote, ramped up after the Crimea invasion, said a former CIA executive. So there's I mean, there's a lot to chew on in this article. So moving forward, actually, I want to take a little bit of a break. So this is a part of the show where I tell you how you can help support this content. The best way to do that is through my membership website at libertyweekly.club. This episode will be going out the night of recording or the morning after, 6/23, June 23rd. So people on the membership list, paid members, $5 per month, will get early access on Thursday. So maybe they've had this episode for like 4 or 5 days, man. I'm also going to announce that I'm going to do a private live stream, and I'm going to do that for my members. And that live stream will be a Ask Me Anything. And in the future, I'm going to make more tiers where people can actually join the call with me. So we'll hang out on a live streamed Zoom call. And that will happen in the future. But for this one, until I add the extra tiers, so $10 a month will get you on the call. $5 a month will get you a link to watch the call and to be in the chat. It'll also get you, access to all the content that you get, early access here, Liberty Weekly bonus episodes. I'm shooting for 2 times a month, and it'll get you other information. Well, what are the other bonuses? It will also get you, my apologies, bonus episodes, early access, preprints to my Libertarian Institute articles, and access to watch the subscribers only live stream. And it'll be, this one again will be next Thursday, June 30th at 8 p.m. Central Time. So I'm going to send out a link to everyone I'll be sending out a link to watch the live stream to all of my premium members on libertyweekly.club. But if you want to join, you can join for free. Just go to, you'll get a free copy of my Liberty Weekly ebook that I'm coming out with. But you also get all the public posts, and all the premium posts also have it has a free preview. So you can read the first half of it and see things like that. So head on over to libertyweekly.club. Another thing, how you can help support this show, is that I have merch now, and I have teamed up with Ludwig von Mises Pieces, the guy who does all my art, all my thumbnails, all of my logo design and stuff like that. And he has created a line of merchandise for the podcast. You can get a coffee mug, which I think looks really cool. You can get a sticker, a die-cut sticker, which are also really awesome. You can get a t-shirt, you can get a sweatshirt, and they also have racerbacks for women and girl t-shirts for the 5 women that listen to this podcast. But I'm wearing a Liberty Weekly t-shirt as well, and I really like mine, and I think the logo turned out really cool. So you can get your Liberty Weekly merch by going to libertyweekly.net/merch, MERCH. Or we also have been collaborating on some logo designs. And so I commissioned this Dissolve NATO t-shirt to be made. And I think that Mises Pieces did a great job with it. You can also get a die-cut sticker of the Dissolve NATO logo, which is the NATO logo that's being shattered into 1 million pieces. And so similarly, you can get a long sleeve sweater of that. Just go to libertyweekly.net/NATO. And very important, use promo code LW10 to get 10% off, and also to tell Mises Pieces that I sent you. All right, so those are all the ways to help support the show. libertyweekly.club, libertyweekly.club, libertyweekly.net/merch/NATO, and libertarianinstitute.org/donate are the ways to support this content. Thank you guys. Really appreciate it. Live stream Thursday, June 30th at 8 p.m. Central. Link will be sent out to all premium members at libertyweekly.club. Okay, so to get back into the content here, I say, although some of the cited intelligence officials, and again, they're all anonymous in that article, so take that for what it is. Some of the officials denied that the training aimed to create an insurgency. I think that's kind of ridiculous because it seems like much of the training is actually duly applicable. I mean, a lot of these tactics that they were teaching these special operations soldiers could also be used to fight an insurgency. I mean, it's about coordinating your movements, using camouflage, navigating, communications, things like that. And I say the semantic squirming that Brzezinski and other intelligence officials employ in their attempts to distinguish defensive support from prepping an insurgency is literally incredible. It's not credible. This is especially true considering the type of weapons that complemented this training. So, all in the years leading up to the Russian invasion, the United States was supplying sniper rifles, armed boats, RPGs, and Javelin anti-tank missiles. And I cite Scott Horton there in his speech. Wow. Okay, I included the wrong link. Should fix that. So, anyways, further, it's the speech that he gave. The war in Ukraine is all America's fault, or something like that. Part of his forthcoming book. So further, in an address that is eerily similar to Brzezinski's 1980 visit to the Khyber Pass, Senators John McCain, Lindsey Graham, and Amy Klobuchar spoke to the Ukrainian 36th Separate Marine Brigade. During the January 2nd, 2017 address, Graham and McCain praised the Ukrainian soldiers. And there's actually video footage of this. It's kind of infamous as well. But this is from a Ukrainian news outlet. And I'm not going to... I believe that's Poroshenko there. But I'll just go right to... You can see McCain's old ass there.
Сьогодні, коли з нами знаходні, напереддень Нового року, коли через декілька годин, хочу подякувати кожного з вас.
I admire the fact that you will fight for your homeland.
Я захоплююсь тим, що ви боретеся за свою батьківщину.
Your fight is our fight.
Ваша боротьба – це наша боротьба.
2017 will be the year of offense.
Рік 2017 рік буде ріком нападу.
All of us will go back to Washington and we will push the case against Russia.
Ми всі повернемося до Вашингтону і ми будемо відстоювати санкції проти Росії.
Enough of a Russian aggression.
Досить вже російської агресії.
It is time for them to pay a heavier price.
Час вже, щоб вони заплатили важчу ціну.
Our fight is not with the Russian people, but with Putin.
Ми боремося не з російським народом, але з Путіним.
Our promise to you is to take your cause to Washington.
Наша обіцянка – це те, що ми вашу боротьбу доведемо до Вашингтона.
Inform the American people of your bravery.
Проінформуємо американський народ про вашу відважність.
And make the case against Putin to the world.
І покажемо про докази проти Путіна усьому світу.
I believe you will win. I am convinced you will win, and we will do everything we can to provide you with what you need to win.
Я вірю в те, що ви виграєте, переможете. Я переконаний в тому, що ви переможете, і ми вам допоможемо всіма можливими засобами.
And we have succeeded not because of equipment, but because of your courage.
Ви успішні не через обладнання, але через вашу відважність.
So I thank you, and the world is watching. And the world is watching because we cannot allow Vladimir Putin to succeed here. Because if he succeeds here, he will succeed in other countries.
Я вам дуже дякую. І весь світ за цим слідкує. І весь світ за цим слідкує, тому що ми не можемо дозволити Володимиру Путіну тут перемогти. Адже якщо він тут переможе, він зможе це зробити і в інших країнах.
So that translator, just for those watching the video version, the translator looks like Gerard Way from My Chemical Romance. I think that's the band that Gerard Way is from. I think that's who I'm thinking of. I think it's pretty funny. So yeah, it's pretty eerily similar, I think, to the speech that Brzezinski gave at the Khyber Pass. Maybe I'm stretching a little bit, but I think that it's close enough to make the comparison. So in the 1980s, Brzezinski's covert bleeder strategy was calculated to give the USSR, quote, its own Vietnam, which Brzezinski later claimed caused the end of the Soviet Union. So I linked to Brzezinski's actual memo to Jimmy Carter talking about this. And I think it's interesting, if you guys want to give it a read, it's very interesting. And so in spring and early summer of 2022, the goal of Washington's involvement in Ukraine became more openly stated. Regime change in Moscow. Was this always the objective? And I linked to my piece on Lindsey Graham, which I think I covered in an episode of this show not too long ago. Lindsey Graham spearheads U.S. regime change effort in Russia. Of course, he was a part of that video that I just played speaking to the Ukrainian Marines. And some people have said that video is Lindsey Graham, John McCain, and Amy Klobuchar actually meeting with Azov Battalion. And I haven't found anything to suggest that those Marines actually were Azov Battalion. Now, they might have fought with Azov during the Russian invasion. That unit might have fought with Azov, but I just haven't found anything to suggest that they actually are. There's no insignia on their uniforms. There's actually a unit that's stated in the Politico piece that covered this. And it says right here, 36 separate Marine Brigade. And I actually asked Will Porter to help me fact check that, and he couldn't find anything, and he's just a bloodhound. So what I said is, unlike the debatable effect of Brzezinski's 1980s Afghan intervention, Washington's involvement in Ukraine was directly cited by Russian President Vladimir Putin as a casus belli. In his February 2022 speech, Putin stated, quote, any further expansion of the North Atlantic Alliance's infrastructure or the ongoing efforts to gain a military foothold of the Ukrainian territory are unacceptable for us. Of course, the question is not about NATO itself. It merely serves as a tool of U.S. foreign policy. The problem is that in territories adjacent to Russia, which I have to note is our historical land, a hostile anti-Russia is taking shape. Fully controlled from the outside, it is doing everything to attract NATO armed forces and obtain cutting-edge weapons. So, of course, talking about all the training that I just discussed, and these U.S. officials talking about how they want to kill Russians, how they're training Ukrainians to kill Russians, or how they were. So I think everyone, if they want a better understanding of exactly what's going on, not a whole lot of people actually read what Putin and the Russians are saying about the war. And I think it's really important that everyone goes in and reads what Putin says. And I won't belabor the point by going through it or anything like that. The link is there in my piece if you want to read it, follow it. So I conclude by saying Brzezinski's influence on the foreign policy establishment is immense. Brzezinski was among the first to call for the end of Putin's government. He was also among the first to compare Putin to Hitler, which is something that you hear all the time today, talking about the Sudetenland and things like that. So I cited Vox Ukraine, which is a piece that actually is pro-Brzezinski. So Brzezinski's proteges include such figures as Barack Obama, Madeleine Albright, Victoria Nuland, Jake Sullivan, and Antony Blinken. And I linked to an interesting piece talking about the Straussians and kind of the Straussian foreign policy. So here it says Joe Biden is not a Straussian, but he has been doing business with them for about 15 years here with Antony Blinken. And I think this is an interesting kind of piece to read. Russia declares war on the Straussians in the Voltaire Network. Although Washington's actual role in provoking the Soviet invasion is debatable, one must wonder, if the Russian invasion of Ukraine were to bring the end of Putin's Russia, would Brzezinski's ghost and its lineage of Straussian ghouls champion Washington's role in exacerbating the conflict? More importantly, if regime change is the goal, what cost must the world be made to pay? And I wanted to add, furthermore, what cost must Ukraine pay for that? But I thought it was a little too wordy. So yeah, I enjoyed this piece. I didn't feel, for some reason, I didn't feel great about it when it went out, but it seems like the reaction has been very positive. So sometimes it's like the piece that I did on Pot Meat Kettle. I don't know if I reviewed that on the podcast. I didn't feel great about that piece, and it seemed like people really, really enjoyed it too. So you never really know which ones are going to take off. Pot Meat Kettle, America's Use of Chemical, Biological, and Nuclear Weapons. So I believe I went through the podcast on that. Just so, I guess, so everyone has the links. I did Pot Meat Kettle, libertyweekly.net/218. And I know I reviewed my other articles on the podcast before. Maybe I didn't. Well, make sure you go through my archive at libertarianinstitute.org/Patrick and find all those other articles. So yeah, anyways, I hope that you guys enjoyed this episode and enjoyed the article. Again, I'll tell everyone to go sign up at my membership website, libertyweekly.club. I'll be doing that live stream next Thursday night, June 30th at 8 p.m. Central Time. And I'll send out a link to all of my premium subscribers at libertyweekly.club. But if you want to sign up for free with your email address, go to libertyweekly.club. I send out blogs, free blogs that you can find. Here's an example of a free blog. Sometimes I slip in Borat GIFs because I love Borat. I did this one as a free episode talking about Fright Night and conspiracy theories. And you get early access to my articles as well. So, okay, guys. Well, thanks. I hope you have a great week, and we'll see you next time. Peace.